Hello everyone, Miss Carrie here. Today we're going to create a simple card design with stencils and stamps. I'm also going to share some of my favorite mixed media tips that will help you add color to your cards. I've gathered a few items from This Calls for Confetti. I often create backgrounds with stencils because they are super versatile and can be used with multiple mediums. On today's project, I'm going to be using two new collections from This Calls for Confetti. One of the stencil sets I'm using is called Sparkles. Simple stencil designs like this are great to have in your collection. They can be used for multiple occasions and holidays. I'm also going to be using this layering stencil set. This decorative retro stripes stencil has so many possibilities. There is a stripe design so that you can create the image, but there are also a couple of masks that you can put over it. There is a thicker stripe design. A circle, arch, and rectangle shape could be used as is, or layered with the stripes to create a background. Delicate stencils like this can be difficult to use, so I'm going to share some helpful tips with you to help you create a clean, crisp stripe design. When it comes to creating Halloween cards, I enjoy making cute designs. Like many of you, I didn't realize how many adorable stamps This Calls for Confetti had. The Witching You collection is a charming design with simple images and sentiments for Halloween. There is also a set of matching dies that can be used to cut everything out. As I create today's project, I'll bring in a few additional supplies. In the description below is a list for you to view, along with a link to the This Calls for Confetti shop. Let's get started with the project. My goal is to create a simple design today, so we're going to use the stripe stencil as is. Delicate lines like this can be difficult to work with, and I find that you get a crisper image when the stencil is tacked in place. You can use adhesive sprays, but they don't work with all paper types, and some of them don't wash off the stencil. I prefer to use a temporary tape runner. This dot runner will hold the stripes in place and wash off with hot water when I'm done. I'm going to press the stencil onto some heavyweight mixed media paper and secure everything in place with magnets. For my background, I'll be using black opaque texture paste. When I use a small spatula, it always catches on the delicate stencil images and I end up with paste underneath the stencil. Using a larger tool prevents this and creates a more even fill of the design. It's also best to move the medium and spatula tool with the design. If I tried to cover this up vertically, it would probably lift up some of the stencil and I'd end up with paste underneath. Once this is all filled in, I'm going to pull up the stencil in the same direction as the design. How cool is that? I love the way this background looks. I'm going to set this aside to dry, wash all my tools and the stencil, and then I'll show you how to make the next stencil design. When I received this sparkle stencil, I wanted to make a design with glitter paste. As I said earlier, designs like this are a great craft room staple. You can use this diamond sparkle shape with multiple mediums on just about any card design. Glitter paste can be a little bit finicky. It does have glitter pieces that can get stuck under the stencil, and most glitter pastes are thin and sticky. With glitter paste, I like to use a rubber or silicone spatula. It has a little more give and doesn't press the thin paste or glitter underneath the stencil. All right, let's take a look at this glitter design. Isn't that cute? This would also be a fun background for Christmas. As my background's dry, I'm going to stamp my image and add some color to the design. I want my image to resemble a printed vintage cartoon strip, so I'm going to heat emboss the design with Distress Oxide ink. Distress oxides are a mix of pigment and dye ink, so it will hold embossing powder, but it doesn't always produce a solid heat embossed image. To ensure a solid image, I'm going to stamp this with clear embossing ink first, and then I'll stamp it with the black soot distress oxide ink. This witch image is mostly solid, and I had to stamp it a few times with that distress oxide ink. This is where a stamping platform came in handy. Now that the image is stamped, I'm going to sprinkle the design with clear embossing powder, and then I'll set the plastic particles with a heat tool. I prefer to apply the heat from below the image. This prevents the powder from getting disturbed as the air flows across the design. As it heats, you're going to see how much it starts to resemble that distressed vintage comic strip design. There is a little bit of texture here, and the image isn't completely filled in. This is the look that I'm going for. I'm also going to stamp and heat emboss a sentiment in the same manner. To color the pumpkins, I'm also going to use Distress Oxide inks. I'm smushing a mix of pink hues onto a silicone mat, and then I'll mix in a little water and use these like watercolor paints. Distress oxides have an opaque, chalky finish, so they're not going to blend like watercolors or watercolor pencils, but they do give you a soft image with a bit of a vintage feel. I'm going to speed this up a bit because I'm not an artist by any means. As you watch me add color, I'll share a few of my novice tips for shading images. Heat embossed images are the easiest to add color to. The raised design acts like a barrier, keeping the color inside the lines. On the first pumpkin, I started with a lighter color, and then I used a bright pink to create a shadow. The second pumpkin is a little darker. I don't own many pink inks, so I brought in a coral color. It still falls within the pink family, but the color created a nice variation in the mix of pinks. I just used the stamped image as my guide for shading, and I added some ink around the edges and some near the ribs of the pumpkin. The little pumpkin was more difficult for me to add color to. It wasn't as light as I would have liked it to be. Distress Oxide inks react with water, so I'm able to remove some of the ink to highlight areas of the pumpkins. I just dipped my paintbrush in some clean water and ran it over the areas where I wanted some of the color removed. In the end, I decided to add some sparkle to it. I created a little pool of glitter with a shimmer brush and painted over the ink. The shimmer lightened the ink some and gave it a wonderful finish. To cut these out, I'm going to use the matching die set. I'm going to secure this in place with some mint tape, and then I'll run it through my die cutting machine. All right, all we have left to do is assemble the card. I have my stamped images and my two background pieces. I cut down the striped pattern to 5 inches by 3 3/4. The glitter background is cut down to 3 inches by 4 1/4. For my card base, I'm going to use one of these speckled patterns. There's a really nice pink hue in here that will match the rest of the card. I've trimmed down the speckled pattern to fit an A2 card base. I'm going to adhere my two background layers in the center of this card base. I added some foam tape between the stenciled layers to create some more dimension. The little witchy image is going to sit over here, and then I'll layer my sentiment right here. You can add some ink to the background or some splatters if you like. I like the simplicity of black and white, so I'm just going to bring in a few little bat images. This confetti mix has some darling little ghosts, bats, and bits of sequins for holiday shaker cards. My card design is not a shaker, but those bats are going to be a perfect addition to the background. I'm just going to bend the wings slightly, and then I'll adhere them in place onto the glitter background. The stamp set also has some bat images and a moon that you could use for this design, but I just adore the look of those little confetti bats. Feel free to use whatever you like. I'm going to finish adhering these in place, and then I'll share the completed card with you. Take a look at this adorable little Halloween card. This is such a simple design that you can create with stencils and mediums of your choice. I like how the retro stripe design creates such a bold background, and the bits of glitter and pink add just the right amount of whimsy. Cute Halloween cards are fun to make, and the classic pink and black design is one of my favorites. The texture created with stencils, vintage images, and a pop of color are the perfect combination for the upcoming holiday. I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope this project inspired you to try something new. If you have any questions about the project or supplies I used, feel free to post those in the comments below. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.